Okay. So, afternoon, everybody. Um, Deja vu. We just went through this about a few weeks ago. And as you know, that the CAR um, held back some forms because the DOJ wanted to look at them before we issued them, and and they wanted to have their input. I will tell you that I was on a CAR meeting on Monday morning, and they never heard back. They haven't heard back from the DOJ, but CAR made a decision. And basically, what the decision is that uh, is that they were going to remove, or they are removing, cooperating broker compensation from the contracts, all contracts. So on your listing agreement, there will no longer be an offer from the seller to offer cooperating broker compensation to the buyer's broker. So that has been removed. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, the seller still has the option of offering concessions as before, but concessions are not binding. So the seller can change their mind about concessions. Um, that leaves us representing buyers with the option of um, asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker in the RPA. So that is now how a buyer's broker is going to ask for compensation from the seller in the RPA. So let's just get into this and look at the listing agreement and see uh, exactly how this is going to look now. Uh, Sorry, hold on. Go. Okay. You all should be looking at the red line version of the residential listing agreement, and all the listing agreements are going to look the same. You know, whether it's residential, it's residential income. It's going to look like this. Number one, you'll notice, and we went over this. We went over this on the last go round of this, is that they've changed this to look the way that everything else looks, and that it's in grid form. So, so obviously this is an exclusive authorization right to sell, which all of our offices are. We only do exclusive rights to sell between the seller and the broker, and the address and the parcel. So the listing agreement, the initial listing, the maximum length is not to exceed, and this is due to a California state law, not to exceed 24 months if improved with 1 to 4 units. So 1 to 4 residential unit cannot be more than 20, written for more than 24 months. And the listing price and the specifics, if it's a manufactured home or the probate. So this is the crux of how you're going to be compensated. And number one is compensation to the seller's broker, and that's either a percentage or a dollar amount. So that is 3%, 2.5%, whatever is negotiated with the seller. Um, how much you as the listing agent will be compensated. So it's no longer whatever you used to put in there and then split it with the cooperating broker. That we're not doing that anymore. It's just you as the listing agent. How are you going to get paid and how much? For C, or C2, excuse me. C2, additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented. That's only if the buyer is not represented at all. Not if he's represented by somebody else, not if you are double ending it. If they are unrepresented, you have a discussion with your seller. Mr. Seller, I'm going to have to be preparing paperwork. I'm going to have to still be coordinating inspections and doing all of this. It's more work for me. Are you going to pay me more of a commission in order to do that? If they don't, and you don't want that added burden, you say to anybody who's not represented, I'm sorry, you need to get representation. You have the right to say that. If your seller isn't going to compensate you additionally, and you're not willing to do it because they're not compensating you, you can do that. But this is through C2 is only, once again, only if they are unrepresented. The continuation of right to compensation from the broker identified prospective buyers, that is when the listing expires or is canceled. That's the safety feature. Is that whatever's negotiated? Is that 90 days? Is that 180 days? Is how many days after the listing expires or is canceled that those people that you identify as prospective buyers, giving them a list, how if they go back and buy it, then you're owed the commission. Seller's obligation to pay previous brokers if they were listed before, yeah, and that broker should have given them a list too. So you would put those persons there. So that is section C is the only section in regards to compensation. What's missing from that? What is missing from that is dual agency. If the listing agent, the same agent in that is writing this off, this listing agreement, if that same agent represents a buyer, traditionally we would do a reduced commission. So that is not here anymore. CAR, we don't want any mention of commission to a buyer's broker. So that's why they've eliminated that. And I will tell you how to compensate for that. So before I move on, any questions regarding how this has changed regarding compensation? We might as well just get into it right now.
Rich, can't a buyer just pay the agent? You're saying the seller could pay an additional or not represent them, but can't the buyer still pay the listing agent of percentage?
No. What I'm saying is, after August 17th, everybody's going to have to get a buyer broker agreement from their buyers. So that obligates the buyer to pay, period. But in that contract, it says, if I get paid from somebody else, Mr. Buyer, you don't owe me any money. So yes, the buyer is obligated to pay, number one. But in order for them not to have to pay, like a first-time buyer who doesn't have the money, or it's money's really tight, in order to get the seller to pay that buyer's commission, that's what I'm talking about. It's done in the RPA, doing the SPBB. Any other questions about compensation before I move on?
Do you project that 90% of the buyers are not going to want to pay the buyer's agent's commission?
100% of the buyers won't have a choice if the seller's not paying.
They just won't use the buyer's agents.
Then how are they going to buy the property? They'll go to the listing agent. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, they'll go to Redfin
Well,
and Realtor.com and those.
well, Redfin has to abide by the same rules too. So they have to get a buyer broker agreement. They have to get an agreement from a buyer to pay their compensation, however they structure that.
But listing agents will just double end 90% of the deals moving forward.
Everybody says that listing agents are doing that now. Listing agents, the percentage of listing agents double ending deals now is
much lower,
less than 10%.
But
And
in the future,
I don't think, but I don't have a crystal ball, and Steve, you don't have a crystal ball.
no,
I don't think
it's naive to think that buyers are going to want to take money
I don't
out of their
think
pockets
that a buyer is going to go to the listing agent.
Rich, I have a
Go
just
ahead.
a Rich question on
Yeah.
2C, the additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented.
Right.
So we're not calling that dual agency.
It's
at this
not
point?
dual agency.
Okay.
It's not dual agency. It is that a buyer is unrepresented, that you have a buyer non-agency disclosure. And
Okay.
basically, a buyer non-agency disclosure says that, Mr. Buyer, I'm not representing you. I'm not giving you any advice about anything, but I'm going to have, during this transaction, I'm going to have to give you documentation, which I'm not going to explain to you. You need to go get counsel on you with your own legal counsel regarding it. But and a lot of that exists now. I mean, lawyers think they know everything, and a lot of lawyers don't want to be represented by an agent, and it's a non-agency. So
Okay.
that's what that's for.
Thank you. That helps to clarify that.
Sure.
I have a question about
Sure.
that. Okay, so if this is the listing agreement,
Mhm.
how do you even know to even have this conversation, to have that line signed when you don't know what buyers are gonna put offers on your listing and whether or not they're gonna have an agent or not?
This is in the case where a buyer is unrepresented. Mr. Seller, are you willing to pay me an additional compensation?
Okay, so you have that conversation before, right?
Right.
Before, and
Right.
it only applies if the buyer does not have an agent and they want you to do the paperwork.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
Rick?
all that. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, are they going, because I've heard about this before with the unrepresented buyer. Are they going to specify what exactly we have to do and not do? Are we still having to do all the paperwork?
Yes,
Buyer,
that's your
but-
obligation to the seller. And your obligation to the brokerage is to make sure that the file is complete. You still have the same checklist that you would have. So that same documentation has to be a part of the file. So you're going to have to give the TDS and the SBQ to the buyer, and you're going to have to do that. So
And then inspections and all of that stuff, they're on their own? We just have
yes, they have to schedule their inspections, and they tell you, I'm not going to do an inspection. Well, okay, then you need to sign this waiver that's saying that you're not going to do the inspection.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And then it still
I have a
goes to,
question.
sure, go ahead.
Do you think that this is like, if you're the listing agent and the buyer comes unrepresented and you give them the paperwork and tell them to go to an attorney, do they have like more basis to sue you if they don't actually go to an attorney and they just like don't read anything or don't understand what they're signing and they just sign it?
No, it's just like any
Because
other.
you don't give them
It's like
any
any
info?
other buyer who doesn't read and sign anything. So no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on. The rest is just boilerplate. If you're going to exclude it, is it going to be marketed? Clear cooperation is still here, so it has to go in to the MLS within 2 business days. Not 2 business days, excuse me, 2 days. If it is not marketed, if it is marketed, then you have to You have to put it in the MLS within 1 day. Seller, excuse me, if they're going to exclude it, if they, excuse me, if they're going to exclude it, you still need an SELM, even though that information is here on this form.
Rich,
Yes,
it's Dave. How are you?
I'm fine.
The question I have is a buyer comes in and open house and they said, we want you to represent us.
Okay.
And I said, well, great. You have to sign this thing. And they go, well, how much are you going to charge me? Do I
Right.
negotiate with them like I've been negotiating with
Absolutely.
the seller?
Absolutely, you
Now,
do.
at that point, and I have to have an agreement with the seller to say, yeah, Dave, it's okay. We want you to handle both sides of the transaction because it'll be easier for everybody. Where does that take place? Is that in the RPA, the listing agreement? What, I mean, which
No,
document do we
no,
get?
it's the agreement of the seller to represent both sides is you have the conversation, because if you are going to make a commission adjustment, and I'm coming up on it right here under additional terms, if you have that conversation with your seller saying, Mr. Seller, there may be buyers who come in who want me to represent them, and in regards to the compensation, I would cut the compensation. I talked to legal earlier today. Okay,
Yeah.
so they said how you've been doing it, because most likely it's, if I represent, if I represent both sides, I'll cut the commission. You would make additional terms, whereas if the listing, if I, and you have to spell out that you, the listing agent, and you specifically represent both the buyer and seller, the seller agrees to pay a total commission of X amount of dollars. So that's there in the agreement under additional terms, when you take the listing. It's the same as, when you were making an exception for dual agency in the contract.
So in essence, nothing has changed with regard to that.
Not in regard to that. But if the seller says, I don't want you to represent both sides, then
That's a different story.
that's a different story. You can't represent both sides.
Right, because my obligation is
Your
with the
obligation
person.
is right, exactly, to
Right.
the seller.
Well,
Okay.
Sorry for being so ethical.
No, that's okay. So once again, under additional terms is, if you want to have an agreement with your seller that if I bring in a buyer and I represent both the buyer and the seller, Mr. Seller, will you pay me a commission of X amount of dollars? Just like you have the conversation of, will you pay me more of a commission because I'm doing the paperwork for both sides? Well, now if I'm representing both sides, both the buyer and the seller, will you? Then that agreement is there, but that doesn't relieve you of the obligation of getting a buyer broker agreement from the buyer.
Right. And if the
prior to
buyer,
making-
say the buyer, because they get solicited all the time, we'll pay you to find
Right.
us this property.
Right.
And I have an agreement and I'm going to make X whatever.
Mhm.
And and I bring this and I put the deal together with my listing. I need to disclose that at that point what all financial aspects of that
Sure.
transaction is taking place,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
So that the
That's
seller
what this
has
is
a
all
clear,
about, is disclosure.
yeah, who's getting compensated and how much. They don't want
Right.
us to make any money. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. I'll let
All
you go.
right. Any questions about
Yeah.
that?
I have a question. So if we as listing agents can represent the seller, and we can also do the paperwork for the buyer, but say that we're not representing the buyer,
Right.
we as agents still have to sign, right? Like some of these documents on the buyer side, the agent has to sign. So if we're signing these buyer documents, like on the agent
Like
line,
what? Name a document. Name a document that you don't sign on behalf of the seller, but you sign on behalf of the buyer. I don't think there is one.
There's no documents that both buyer agent and seller
Yes.
agent
But
have
you're
to
signing
sign?
as the listing agent. You're not signing as a representation of the buyer.
So you
remember,
don't,
you have a document that says, I don't represent
the buyer.
the buyer, right? You have that document, but I'm gonna have to give you paperwork. So you
Right.
have that.
But if there's any document that I'm sending to the buyer that I'm not representing, because I'm representing the
Right.
seller, and it
Right.
has a line on there that says signature, broker signature, or real estate on the buyer side, leave that blank?
Right, because you're not the buyer's representation.
Okay.
You're signing and you're sending documentation on behalf of the seller,
Right.
not on behalf of the buyer.
Okay.
Okay,
Hi, Rich. It's Denise Marks.
Hey.
I have a question.
sure.
So if we're not representing the buyer, so there's no avid from that side?
No,
Okay.
there's no obligation for an avid. But the buyer has to sign the seller's avid.
But as long as the seller agrees, you can have a buyer broker with the buyer, them paying you, and the seller just with their regular commission paying you as a listing agent. And then you would just do all the paperwork on both sides.
Correct.
Okay.
Because if you are representing both sides, then you do have to
Right.
do an avid for both sides.
A quick question.
Sure.
If a buyer so agrees to pay the commission and we are representing the buyer, is there any specific amount that we are allowed to charge them, I mean, percentage wise? So, or
Whatever's
actually
negotiable.
sellers?
Commissions are negotiable. It's
Okay, it's not has to be the same as the sellers.
No,
that
doesn't
thing.
have to be.
All right, thank you.
So
Rich,
this
quick
goes.
question.
Go, sure.
Quick question. Do we need to disclose our commission agreement with the buyer to the seller?
Do you need to disclose your commission agreement? Are
With the
you
buyer.
asking? Are you asking the seller to pay it?
No.
Okay, if you're
Let's
not
say
asking
seller
the
says-
seller to pay it,
Well, I'm just trying to see if there is an obligation to disclose my commission agreement with the buyer, because the seller said, I'm gonna pay you 2.5%, do whatever you want. So I went to the buyer and I asked him, you have to pay 2.5% on your side. Do I need to disclose that to the seller?
okay, we get into a really muddy area when I get a question that says, "Do I need to disclose?" Here's the problem with that. This whole mess that we're in is because everybody said we didn't disclose what we're doing. That's what this is all about. So I don't know, I don't understand what the downside is of disclosing what you're getting from the buyer. I don't understand what that issue is, because the seller, if you're not asking, I mean, the seller's not paying it. So I don't understand what the downside is.
Well, they might want to say, hey, you don't need to make that much, so that you can give me a discount on the listing commission.
Exactly.
Well, but you already have a written agreement for the listing commission, so
It's all up to negotiation anyway.
They
it is.
decide
It
they're-
is all up to and that's what this is about. Is that it's all up to negotiation. That commissions are not set; they are negotiable, and what you negotiate with one person is different from what you negotiate with another person.
I have a question, Rich. So
Sure.
let's just say on a listing, I'm getting 2.5%. The buyers don't have representation. They said, will you represent us? But we're only willing to pay you 0.5%. And I know like at Keller Williams, like most companies, we're not ever supposed to take something for 0.5% because of liability. What is going to be the minimum amount that Keller Williams will allow us to take to represent a buyer?
I haven't been told what that is yet. I don't know that we're there. I don't know what we're there yet. There is a brokerage can make a policy that not to take, just like we can make a policy of, we're not accepting listings for X amount. and remember, there is in every single agreement, every single listing agreement, there is a clause that this needs to be approved by management. So yes, there probably will be a policy initiated. You know, I haven't heard what that is just as of yet, but I would imagine that there would be. I mean, there probably, why would you accept a buyer representation of 0.5% when you were getting 2.5% prior, and you can always go to the seller to ask them to pay it. So that's what I struggle with, is why are you suddenly discounting yourself? I just asked that question.
Well, that just depends on how much you owe that month to your credit cards.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you know, that's the thing. I mean, you know, all these years, it's like, I can't tell you how many agents who say, "Oh, I did a favor, I took this listing and I did this favor." And isn't that the favor? Isn't that the transaction that comes and bites you in the butt? It really is. So everybody's been saying this since this all began, is that you have to sell, you're worth something. You have knowledge, you have value, and you've got to communicate their value. Don't undersell yourself. Don't. I mean, I wouldn't do it. You know, I would ask for the 2.5%, the 3%. I'd ask for that and say, hey, we're gonna go to the seller and try to get it from the seller. I saw you, Christine. I'll go back to you, but you know, we're gonna try to get this paid, and if we get it paid through the seller, then you know, that offsets what you owe me. Then if you're not going to get it, and then you can always change your agreement with the buyer. Why go into it at a discount instead of going into it with what you're worth and making the decision during the transaction, or at some point that, hey, I'm not, I see that this isn't going to work out. This is, you know, they're going to be struggling here a little bit. Hey, I'll come. How many of you have credited your commission back to a buyer or a seller for whatever reason, you know, in order to make the thing? But why do it at the get-go? That's what I say.
Hey, Rich, what's your opinion on if you're representing a buyer and you have a buyer broker agreement and you tell your buyer, hey, we're going to try and get the seller to pay the commission and offset that, and you go to the listing agent and say, hey, here's an offer for your property. Will your buyer or will your seller pay the buyer's side broker commission? And they say, hey, have you got a buyer broker already signed with your buyer's agent that they'll pay a commission? What do you say to the buyer, or what do you say to that selling agent at that point?
You say, yes, I do, because
number one, I don't have to pay you anything.
Number one, I have to. No, they don't. But if they hey, look, there's nothing that says, and this is one of the conversations I had with legal today. There's nothing that says that the seller on a $500,000 property doesn't say, okay, I'll accept a $520,000 property, and then I'll pay your broker. What's to stop that? Nothing. The seller can up their price in order to compensate for paying your broker. There's nothing that stops that. So there you go. And buyer, wouldn't you rather be represented, have your own representation, than being represented by somebody who is also representing the listing agent? That's, you know, so that's, yeah, that's that.
Can sorry to jump in, but
Sure.
so you're saying, can a buyer specify that in an RPA then?
Specify what?
Specify that their offer is 500,000 for the property and 20,000 and 520 and 20,000 of that is to be paid
No.
to the no.
No.
Okay, it has to
Well,
be
well,
like a verbal agreement, like
No, what you do is you're offering more than what you would normal offer and ask for them to pay the compensation.
yeah, but if it's not on paper, then that doesn't really exist, right? Like if it's not,
But if it's on paper and it shows on paper that's you're getting more for the property in
Mhm.
order to compensate for the thing. Everything's negotiable. Everything's
No,
a
I
negotiation.
understand that, but anybody can say anything. And if a seller says, yeah, sure, offer 520, I'll accept. Yeah, I'll pay the buyer's agent. And then closing, nope, I changed my mind.
No,
But it's
not
in the
doing-
RPA. It's in the
That's what I was
RPA.
just gonna say.
It's in the RPA.
It's
You
in
were
your
not
offer.
getting this in writing in the RPA through
That's
the
what-
HDB, but you're
That-
not writing out, I'm paying you 520 and then you're
Right.
gonna and then 20 of that goes towards my buy. You're not, that's not being written there. This exists presently in the RPA to ask the seller to pay
To
the
pay
buyer,
the
to
buyer broker.
buyer's broker. It's
Right.
there
That's-
already.
That was my question. I just wanted to cover my bases to make sure that it's gonna
It's
be in
there,
writing.
yes,
No one can
it is.
back out. No one
No,
can say,
it's there in
"Oh."
the contract. And they're agreeing to it. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
I
Yeah.
have a question, Rich.
Sure.
Because I have had some questionable clients. I am wondering if you tell your client, hey, you have to sign this, we'll ask for the buyer, the seller to pay for it. I'll let you know beforehand if the seller isn't already paying compensation, so that you're
But
aware.
you're not going to know that now.
But
you're
you can
not
call and
gonna know.
ask, right?
Well, unless they have it, they're not going to have it in writing. Just like you're not going to have it in writing that they're going to pay. They're going to pay a cooperating broker. They're not going to have it in writing.
Okay.
There's no more cooperating broker compensation
That's why.
agreement. No more.
Okay.
It's going away. That's what.
So,
yeah.
So my question still is, if you say, I'll take you to see these properties, it's likely you will have to pay me. You go show them the property, they fall in love with it, you put in an offer, and they won't pay you. And then your client says, well, we're not going to pay you. We want
But
to cancel the
how are they
contract."
not going to pay you? You have an agreement, and there's escrow instructions from the agreement that state that that's the money they have to come up with in order to close.
So do you just not take on clients who can't pay
Yeah.
you if the seller doesn't? You just tell them you're not working with them if they can't pay? Because I work with a lot of VA clients, and I work with a lot of first-time home buyers who can't pay a commission. So if the seller won't pay the commission on the buyer broker agreement and they say no, then can your client just say, I don't want you to represent me, and then go buy it with the listing
Well,
agent?
you can say to your client, I'm sorry, I can't represent you. I can refer you to the listing agent, but before you refer them to the listing agent, you get a referral fee agreement from them.
Okay, that mostly answers the question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. This explains the additional compensation for unrepresented buyers. Is there something on here? Goes into not really recovery, buyer breaching. Yeah, there was.
Hey, Rich, can we download this highlighted document so I can see it larger?
It's on CAR. It's on CAR.org.
Highlighted just like this in red?
Yes, go look for July release. When you do a search, go to July release. Actually, if you go on CAR.org, there is a big red banner at the top, and it says something about forms. Click on that; it'll bring you to the whole set of forms that are coming out on July 24th, and this is one of them. Um, I want to move on to, there wasn't anything else that really needed.
Rich, do we have to rewrite our listing agreements that we have in effect?
Yeah, I'm gonna go into that, though. No, you don't have to rewrite your listing agreements, but I will go into that. So wait, I should stop share, and now I'm gonna share. Whoop. Did I stop share? No, it didn't. Okay, there we go. So now if we hold on, sorry. Hold on. I'm gonna go to the no, that's modification of term. Sorry, wrong one.
Hey, Rich, while you're looking for something, just a quick, there is no issue of having a verbal conversation with your seller about potentially being asked in the RPA to pay for the buyer's agent.
No, you should be having that conversation.
Okay, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that there's no.
No, you
thought
should be
that-
asking. Yeah, you should be having that conversation.
It's just not in writing. Yeah.
Right. Well, what do you mean? It's not.
Well,
in
it's
writing?
not in the listing agreement anymore, cooperating broker.
No, it's not. But you. Okay. You just reminded me that I probably should go because this is a brand new form.
Right.
This form here.
Hey, Rich, it's
Yeah.
Christine. I was
Sure.
just gonna say, if you guys went on SRAR today, there was a drop down menu to look at, and there's a fantastic video on there about a lot of the stuff that Rich is talking about. But it actually says they're going to be changing it automatically on MLS. Some of the stuff that you don't have to change anything, they're changing it. But
Well,
oh,
what do you
shoot,
mean by changing it automatically? The
Well, they're just
MLS is
taking
doing
away
away with the compensation fields. Yes.
right, but that you didn't have to go in and do anything with your listings on the MLS that were changing unless it was
Not on the MLS because it
Right.
just disappears.
right,
No.
right.
But that's SRAR is putting that on. I don't know.
Yeah, it was.
I
thought
think
it
I
was
have to have a conversation with them over there because
Yeah.
that gives a false sense there. Yeah, you don't have it goes away from the MLS. Yes,
right.
but there is something you have to do with your listing. But here's something you need to do with your. This goes hand in hand with your listing agreement. Is everybody seeing the multiple listing service addendum? Are they
Yes.
seeing? Yeah. Okay. So this is an addendum, just like before. It was within the contract, but it goes over what the MLS is. They've pulled that part out. But here is. I'm sorry. Oh, somebody's not muted. Okay, I can't figure out where is this? Mute. Okay. Mute all. Okay. So, all right. So, this talks about the MLS. Talks about excluding from the MLS. Once again, you can put it in this part of this addendum, but you also will need an SCLM because most MLSs require the SCLM. Never check. Clear cooperation policy does not apply because it does apply to us. Okay, but down here is seller concessions. So this is added to this MLS addendum. Seller concessions. So it explains what concessions are. Concessions may include, but not limited to costs of escrow, all that stuff. Identified in the MLS listing are not promises to pay, but instead indicate to a buyer that the seller will consider offers asking for concessions. Concessions specified in the MLS are not intended to be binding on the seller unless included in the accepted purchase agreement. Concessions specified in the MLS must be allowed to be used for any permissible seller expense or cost and must not specify the concessions are to be used for broker compensation. So seller authorization. Seller does not, it defaults to seller does not authorize broker to put in the MLS that seller is willing to consider offering concessions. But you can check that seller authorized broker to put in the MLS that seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions if allowed under MLS rules. And yes, every MLS is going to be allowing this. But you notice there is not a dollar amount, there is not a percentage. They have moved away from that. And my guess is that I haven't heard from CRMLS or the MLS, but my guess is that will be gone in the MLS also. They had talked about putting in, when you put in a listing, you will be asked, will they offer concessions? If the answer is yes, then you could put in a percentage or a dollar amount. My guess is that will not be there anymore because they want to stay as far away from looking like we're paying the buyer broker. So it's just a yes or no. So either your seller authorizes you to offer concessions, but once again, they're not binding, or they're not offering. So,
Rich, where would that yes or no be? Will it be,
it defaults to no. Seller
seen
authorization.
by the public?
What? Say that again?
Will concessions be seen by the public, or is it like a
Yes.
private remark?
Yes,
Okay.
they will be seen. Everything is going to be seen by the public. Let me tell you that, because that's, once again, that's the whole mess that we're in, because we were not consumer friendly, according to everybody.
But
So
Rich, the concessions is going to be a yes or no checkbox,
Yes,
right? Not an
gonna be-
amount, and we're not to put amounts.
that is my guess, is that it will not be amount.
Yes.
Previous to what just happened, they were going to allow percentages or an amount, but my guess is that's going to go away, because if CAR is moving away from that, then my guess is CRMLS will follow suit.
That makes
and
sense.
The MLS will follow suit. It is either yes or no. So that's my guess.
Okay. Thank you.
Rich,
Yes.
would the private remarks be still there?
Yes, but you're not to put anything in private remarks regarding compensation to the buyer broker.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rich, David Smith, if I may. So I came in a few minutes late when you were going over the new listing agreement, but maybe you covered this. But if the seller wants to offer compensation,
No.
okay,
They can offer concessions.
That's
No, we should not be.
concession, not
We should not.
Okay.
David, you did miss some of it, and one of the major things is that cooperating broker compensation, the form and every mention of it is gone.
No, I heard that. I just wasn't.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
No,
that was
I
clear.
would
So even
not
if they
offer
want to,
compensation.
there's no way to put it in there.
We don't want you to put it in there.
So Rich, you just say yes concessions, and you call the listing agent and ask them what that might be, so you can write your offer appropriately.
Yes.
No, I wouldn't say either. I would say you write your offer asking the seller to pay your buyer broker agreement. Pay your buyer broker compensation. Write the offer.
Why would they want to do that?
Why would you want to do what?
Why would the seller want to pay the buyer's expenses? I mean, as part of the concessions, and you said that they're not
Yes.
supposed to be concessions anymore.
But no, that's the whole thing, is that you are owed this money from the buyer, but within the contract, you have the ability to ask the seller to pay the buyer's broker.
Doesn't hurt to ask.
Well, but my guess is that you're probably not going to get many answers as to whether they will or will not. I mean, they probably won't.
That would submit it like.
They'll
under the
probably
single
say
part-
submit the offer
Right,
and ask for it.
right.
So-
It doesn't hurt to ask.
Okay.
I know we're turning in the buyer broker agreement, but is there anywhere in the contract we're gonna write that in to please acknowledge the buyer broker agreement or something?
No, because it's within the contract already. That if the seller agrees to pay for your buyer broker compensation, then escrow is going to have a copy of the last page where it confirms the amount that is being paid.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So that's the that is the
Hey, Rick, sorry, I have one more question.
sure.
It's Erica. All right, I have a listing coming soon, a condo. My sellers are willing to pay the buyer's agent
Mhm.
2.5% commission. We also want to offer, the seller also wants to offer a buyer $5,000 concession towards whatever they want, closing costs or whatever.
Okay.
So where would I put that?
Well, nothing has changed within the MLS now. Nothing is going to change. If you're CRMLS, they will change. They're changing it on the 13th. Probably every other MLS is going to change it on the 17th when all these new rules come into effect. So
Mhm.
if you have a present agreement with your seller that they're gonna offer cooperating broker compensation, you put it in just as you did before.
Okay.
I believe that CRMLS presently has a field for concessions, and you could put the concession that they're also offering there in the MLS. If not, then I would put it in private remarks.
And I can put the dollar amount in private
Right now
remarks?
you can.
Okay.
Starting on the 17th, no.
And so what would I put? Call agent, concessions, call agent?
You could do that, or you can presently put up until the 17th, you can put seller offering X amount of dollars concession.
Okay.
But I believe if it's CRMLS, that it's already there. A concession field is already there.
I'm with Claw though.
Okay,
Claw
I don't know about,
MLS.
I'm not sure about Claude and.
Okay.
Rich, I have a question. I'm taking a house in Woodland Hills. I'm taking the listing. Probably I'm gonna take it on the 26th of July. It's gonna go in the MLS on the 27th as of coming soon. We're gonna paint it because there's tenants in it. We're gonna put it active probably the 12th through the 14th of August. So because of those dates, and I'm gonna be taking the listing on the 26th, will I then be using this new form since this form's coming out on the 24th? I'm a little confused.
When are you taking the listing?
The 26th?
Then yes. It won't be, no other form will be available. Starting the 24th, everything that's revised is the new form. You're looking at the revised form. Okay. So there would be no offer of compensation. You can have the conversation with the MLS addendum regarding concessions, whether they're willing to give concessions. But yeah. So for those of you who presently have a listing agreement, that's going to exceed the 17th of August. On the 17th, you will then have your seller sign this, a disclosure and modification to the listing agreement. And what this is, it talks about offering compensation to brokers. You, the seller, may ask to deal with compensation in other ways. CCAR form BCA, which you all should be using presently. It's broker compensation advisory. It explains compensation to both buyers and sellers, so you should be using it. But the important part of this document, as of the 17th, is number 2, modification of the listing agreement. Broker agrees to notify seller once the MLS will no longer be used to offer compensation. As I said, CRMLS is doing it on the 13th. As far as I know for a fact, because I talked to the MLS, they're doing it on the 17th. Yeah. So, I'm sure those of you who are Ventura and Flex, I think everybody else is doing it on the 17th. I don't know why CRMLS decided to do early, but they are. So broker also agrees to discuss the various ways buyer's broker may be compensated. Those are those conversations about offering concessions. They're also it is also a conversation about the buyer asking the seller to pay the buyer broker obligation. So a seller agrees that the listing agreement term authorizing broker to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the MLS will no longer be effective as of the date the MLS prohibits such offers of compensation. Seller and broker agree that the total compensation shall be reduced by the amount authorized to be offered in the MLS. Meaning, if you took a listing for 5% and you were offering 2.5% to the listing agreement, that listing agreement automatically is modified that the compensation is 2.5%. So this, with existing listing agreements, on the date that the MLS no longer accepts cooperating broker offers of compensation within the MLS, it automatically changes that agreement to for the compensation to be reduced. Any questions?
Rich, but if you had a buyer broke,
This is only dealing with the listing agreement.
I understand, but when the MLS changes and there's just the box for concessions or no concessions, if you had a 2.5 in there for the buyer's broker, that'll disappear and it'll automatically click concessions.
No.
You have to go
The
in.
listing agent has to go in because concessions aren't binding. So concessions, the seller isn't bound. If they say, yes, I will give a concession, it's not binding to them. They can change their mind. So
you just go in and click concessions then at that point.
Only if your seller authorizes it.
Right. If they want to pay a buyer, broker fee.
It's not you cannot tie it to the broker fee.
Right, but if they are willing to pay the agent on the other side with.
No, you have to word it that you have to go back to that form, the MLS addendum form, of what a concession is. It's offering compensation for many different things, closing costs. You cannot, I repeat, cannot tie it to buyer broker compensation. Are you willing to offer concessions? Yes or no? That should be the conversation. Then you should also have a conversation with the sellers that within the RPA, the buyers may ask you to pay their obligation to their broker for that compensation. So you should consider that also. But one does not really collate with the other 100%.
So they're two different things.
They are
Concessions
really
and
two different things.
Got it. And so we're really talking to our sellers about concessions, which can be a variety of things.
Right.
And then compensation, because they may be asked to pay the
Right.
brokerage and they may be able to do
Exactly.
concessions as in
Exactly.
closing
David,
costs
yeah.
or whatever. Two separate
Yeah.
conversations.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we used to call it incentive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What's your
So-
incentive for showing my property? Right. Okay.
So any questions about this? Remember,
I
go ahead.
I have another one.
Sure.
Because you said that it's automatically gonna split the commission in half. Does it like split it down the middle in half? Because I've already had this conversation with my client. He's only paying 4.5% right now. So we're splitting it evenly 2.25% each side. Will the MLS automatically do that? Because my client said that he'll leave it at that much. Obviously, we won't be able to tell each other that, which I understand. But if someone comes in with only a 2% commission, does that mean that like I can't have 2.5% on the list side when I already have this agreement?
Okay, it's not, number one, the MLS has nothing to do with this except that box where it said cooperating broker.
I'm sorry. I meant the listing
BAC.
agreement. I meant the listing agreement. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I misspoke.
that's going away. So that just disappears. Okay, so it's no longer being offered.
It'll
The
be
answer to
zero.
your question is dependent on how you filled out your listing agreement.
It
If you
says
got a,
4%.
if you have a 4%, but you're offering 1.5 to the cooperating broker, then it gets reduced 1.5.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't say that. So it would go straight down the middle.
No,
'Cause it says
how is,
2.25.
okay, how is the listing agreement, what is put in the listing agreement presently for cooperating broker compensation? That's a separate line.
2.25, which is half of the
Okay.
4.5%, which
Right.
is what I was saying.
Okay, if you left it blank, people who leave it blank, you need to go in and fill that in. You need to modify that listing agreement to make it clear what the cooperating broker compensation is now, because once this goes into effect, that number has to be clear on the agreement in order for that amount to go away, really. Because believe me, I'm not dealing with sellers who said, I agreed to pay, 5%, but my agent explained to me that was being split with somebody and you didn't put it in the contract. So technically that seller is on the hook for 5%. And I'm not dealing with those. I'm not dealing with those calls. So you need to make sure that you have filled out your listing agreement correctly and that it is clear what is being offered to the cooperating broker presently, so that when this modification goes into effect, that amount is subtracted from the total amount that your seller is contracted for. Any questions about that before we move on?
Yeah,
Rich.
Rich.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Hi, Lena. I just want to clarify the concession and the two terms again. In the listing agreement, you can say the seller is willing to offer a concession.
It's
But
not in the listing agreement
Not in the
starting on the 24th. On the 24th, it is in the MLS addendum that
Okay,
that-
okay. So
Right.
then the reciprocation for the seller to pay the buyer broker, if he or she chooses, would come with the offer from the buyer.
correct.
And there is it referred to as compensation versus concession?
It's referred to as compensation. Right. I'll go to that now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Rich, before you go too far,
Sure.
I just want to be clear on the documents that we need to modify current listings.
That was just that one that I
Just
just
that
was-
one, okay.
That's it. That's
Okay,
all you have to
perfect.
do. Nothing
Thank you.
else. Okay. All right,
Oh, sorry,
so
one last thing with that, our
Sure.
checklist is gonna be modified, right?
yes, I've been, ask
Right.
Raha, we've been going back and forth for
And
days.
it'll auto-populate in the car forms?
Um,
Not necessarily.
not necessarily, no.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so here this is the form that that we're all talking about, to ask the seller in the RPA to pay for the buyer's broker. And it's 3Q something, I think. I'll quickly go over the RPA. So seller payment to buyer broker. So this is the buyer's agent. So you have a buyer broker agreement. You're asking the seller to pay the buyer's obligation to you. So you fill this out, 1A, subject to paragraph 1B below. Seller agrees to pay buyer broker. Let's say your buyer broker agreement is for 2.5%, 2.5% of the purchase price. 1B says maximum seller payment obligation. Seller shall only be obligated to pay the buyer broker the lesser of I, the amount specified in 1A, or II, the amount buyer is obligated to pay the buyer broker pursuant to their buyer broker agreement. So you're asking them to pay the amount that you're owed, so they would be the same amount. Buyer representation regarding compensation. Buyer represents that as of the date signed by the buyer below, buyer has a signed representation with buyer broker, and the amount specified in paragraph 1 is no more than the amount buyer is obligated to pay the buyer broker pursuant to the buyer representation agreement, and if applicable, less any amount than others have agreed to pay. Delivery of the buyer broker, there was a question somewhere about, do you have to show the buyer broker the agreement to the seller? Delivery of the buyer representation agreement, buyer authorizes buyer's broker, and if applicable, escrow holder upon request to deliver to seller or seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer representation agreement identifying the compensation buyer has agreed to pay, such as the last page of CAR form BRBC. You will notice that on the BRBC, the amount owed by the buyer is in two places. It's on the first page in that grid, but it also is on the last page where the buyer signs. And why did they do that? So that you only have to deliver the last page, and it shows how much you're owed. So that's that. So the third party beneficiary, seller acknowledges and agrees that the buyer broker is a third party beneficiary of this agreement and may pursue seller for failure to pay the amount specified in this document. Basically saying, seller, if you've agreed to pay and then you don't pay, then we can go after you. That's all. So any questions about this?
Rich, when we use this form, I'm to assume that the CBC goes away entirely from what we knew.
CBC is disappearing.
Okay,
there will
yes.
no longer be a CBC.
Okay.
And there also
Perfect.
will no longer be an ABCD, which was anticipated broker compensation disclosure. And
Okay.
why? Because it refers to the CBC.
Right.
And it also refers to the MLS. So so that is going away totally also. So those, as of the 24th, those two documents are gone.
Okay.
So Rich, this goes back to what I was asking earlier,
Mhm.
that if you have a buyer broker agreement and the buyer's agreeing to pay you 2.5%, but wants you to have the request to have the seller pay the commission.
Right.
And then if the seller asks, you submit an offer and say, we were requesting the seller to pay 2.5% commission to the buyer's broker. And if the buyer, or if the seller says, do you have a cooperating agreement where the buyer is agreeing to pay your commission? And you say yes, then he's gonna say, no, I don't want to pay it if you got your buyer to agree to pay it. But your buyer wants you to get the seller to pay it.
Right.
What are you gonna
And
do?
as I said, there's nothing that keeps the seller from saying, yeah, I'll pay your thing if you pay this. There's nothing that prevents the seller from doing that, number one. Number two, well, you've submitted an offer, and your buyer is still obligated
But they don't
pay
want to
you.
pay. They don't want to pay you.
But then but
They're
you
going
shouldn't
on the
be then you
premise that
shouldn't be
you're gonna
working
get
with
the
that.
seller to
Then you
pay.
shouldn't be working with that buyer, because as of the 17th of August, if you're working with a buyer, you must, it's mandatory. And come January of 2025, it will be a state law that you have to have a buyer broker agreement in place.
You're going to lose a lot of agents, I'm telling you.
Where are they going to go? It's statewide.
They'll go into another career.
You're going to be lawyers.
Great. Then there's more for-
Right, exactly. How
Good
many
for us,
of
more
you
for
would be
us.
sad to see buyers agents disappear who don't want to do the work and who don't know their worth, who don't sell themselves to their clients? That's what I'm saying. You're worth it. You've got to sell yourself you sell yourself to a seller. You've done it how many years?
Rich, you're being naive if you believe that the masses validate and have an opinion that real estate agents are essential for a real estate transaction.
Well, Stephen, I think you're being naive to think that the seller is not going to want to pay it in order to sell their house. Right. They will.
I think they will.
Especially
if they
what's going to happen is that you don't need the MLS and you don't need CAR. You're just going to go back, put an ad in the newspaper, and we're going to go back 45, 50 years from what we progressed from.
All right. Okay.
So basically, Rich, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, listen, my buyer, I tell my buyer, listen, here, you and I got to work out an agreement of how much you're going to compensate, my compensation, the broker compensation, right?
Right.
I'm going to, whatever house we go to and you like, we're going to make an offer. I'm going to ask with that offer for them to pay the broker side, my broker side. But if they don't, you basically, this is what you got to do, right? And that's basically it, right? Somebody's got to pay.
Win or lose, you're going to come out with something.
Right. I mean, yeah,
like a lawyer.
Right. I think
Rich,
so. Yes.
Rich, the SPVB, do we just make that a part of our RPA? The purchase agreement, do we make a document?
You should, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
If you have an RPA and you put that in and the seller doesn't agree to those terms, you don't have a deal if that's the bottom line for your buyer.
Yes, you do, because the buyer is still obligated to pay you.
Yeah.
The buyer has a contract with you.
The offer, if it's in the terms in the offer and the seller says, I'm not accepting that term, they counter it out.
Right. That doesn't negate the agreement that you have with the buyer to pay that.
But that deal, your buyer could walk away from.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
If that's an extra 25 grand out of their pocket and they can't afford that just on a simple basis of $1 million property.
But you guys, that should be a conversation that happens before you ever start working with them. That's the reason for getting the agreement. And that's the value that you're bringing to them. So yes, it's a possibility, Mr. Buyer, that you may be obligated to pay me. I'm going to try to get that from the sellers. If not, then you have to make a decision whether you really want that house and compensate me or not.
Right. Going into this offer, they have to assume that they're paying it because they're obligated to pay it. So
yeah, by the higher price. Well, that's what started all this. Our compensation is already incorporated into the price of selling the house.
Right.
And so we can discount the purchase price if you're a good negotiator. by the 2.5, whatever the number is that you agree to with your client. And if you can't do it, then you can't do it. Just like on the listing side, if you can't get the price you agreed to list it for, what are you going to do? You're going to reduce your costs
Right.
to get them what they want. It's simple. They just put too many papers involved in it and nobody's reading them.
Yeah, well, they got to start reading. There's a couple of other forms that I want to make sure that that this is a new form. They realized that there was a buyer broker agreement, but there wasn't one to represent a tenant. So there now is a form to represent tenants to be compensated, because the compensation is obviously going away from the MLS where we were originally, the offer of compensation was. So once again, you're asking the tenant to pay your brokerage fee. And it's like I said, it's a brand new form. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if you're working with tenants to get that, it's not required. I will say it's not required by law.
Thank you.
Or, it's not required by NAR, because that only refers to residential 1 to 4. The new rules refer to residential 1 to 4. There's one other. Go
Rich,
ahead.
can I ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
So, because I've got a lease listing coming up right now, because basically what happens with leases is you just go to an application. There's no is there going to be like an LOI or something that asks the landlord to pay it?
No.
Or how? So
No,
how
they
would
haven't yet. They haven't yet. That's probably the next thing that they're probably going to come up with.
Why?
But no, they're not.
So is it just safe to assume then, once this goes into effect, that landlords just aren't going to be paying anymore?
Probably not. I mean, yeah.
Let them show their own property.
Mm.
Hey, I'm the owner, so I'm not too mad at that for this particular situation, but okay.
It went out of my head what I was going to show you next. What's this? I went over this the last time, buyer identification of properties, but also to go into
An open house.
Oh, that's what I was going to show you. Thank you. There's still that open house to use as a sign-in sheet, but also wait, let me find this. Hold on. Sorry.
PSRA, property showing and representation agreement.
Yes, thank you. That's
You're
what I
welcome.
wanted to think. Thanks, Jasmine. Okay. So it was, I think, Dave, I think you brought it up. The buyer comes into your open house and wants you to represent him. Well, they had come out in the June thing with some kind of form, but they've replaced it with this. So it's property showing and representation agreement, and it's good for the property that the one property you're showing and 3 other properties. And it's not to exceed 30 days. So it's an agreement to pay, it's a buyer broker agreement to pay on these specific properties for a total of 4 and for 30 days. So it's just like the buyer broker agreement, except it's very limited. If it goes beyond that, then obviously you will have to get a buyer broker agreement in place. Okay.
So wait a minute, when am I using this form?
You're using this, say you have an open house and the buyer's not represented, then you say, then the buyer says, okay, I want you to represent me. You can use this form to get an agreement with them prior to putting in an offer with the seller. And then it also is good for if that should fall through, it's good for 3 additional properties. And it's non-exclusive, and it's for a period of 30 days.
So is that, is that a full agency representation though? Like,
Yes.
is there,
Yes.
so there's still payment attached to it or no?
Yes. Yes. Because you can see A, representation period, B, broker, B1,
Yeah,
amount of compensation. Yes.
Hmm.
And then
So-
once again, it says if broker receives compensation from the seller or others, then that amount is offset.
So Rich, if a buyer comes to the open house and they say that this is not exactly what I want, but if you find something within this new listing, let me know, so we can have them sign this, and this is good for
Yes.
like 3 or 4,
Right.
and then
Yes.
have them sign it for another 4, and then email them the information.
If it goes
that work?
beyond this, 4, then you should get a full buyer broker
Buyer's
agreement. Yeah.
Buyer broker. Thank you.
Hey, Rich, I got a question for you.
Sure.
At the open house and somebody walks in and they like the house, they say, oh, we'd like to write an offer. And you say, okay, would you like me to represent you? And they say yes, but do we have to explain to them that they don't have to have representation? Is that our obligation, or do we just say, I will represent you?
Well, you're asking the question, do you want me to represent you?
Yeah, but you don't but you have to sit down and start explaining to them that they can buy it without any kind of representation?
Well,
Obligation?
Let your conscience be your guide.
well, yeah,
No,
I
thanks, man.
would always, I would. Here's the thing, I would. And once again, it goes back to the whole thing. You got to sell yourself, guys. If you're representing a buyer, it's like, look, you can write an offer without being represented, but I'm still obligated on behalf of the seller to be giving you all this paperwork. I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be able to explain any of this to you. You need to get the advice of a real estate attorney for that. So you can go in unrepresented, or I can represent you.
Right, okay.
I mean, that's.
I would
Did I
do
really need to
it-
tell you that, Alan? I mean, really? Come on.
I get it, thanks.
Okay.
Rich,
Yes.
you don't need this form if someone comes in just to look at the house, right?
No,
Only
you
if
don't.
they're
That's
Thank
the
you.
open house form. That's the open house. That's this form.
So there will be a form we need for people
This
coming
is
in.
it.
so-
Open house visitor, non-agency disclosure. So this
So we would just
acts
use
as
that
your
instead of our
Yes.
checking sheets that we
Yes.
normally use?
right. You don't have to use this, but it explains. It's being transparent. I would use it. It can't hurt.
Rich,
Yes.
if we have a situation where our sellers instruct us, everybody's to sign in one way or another, or else they don't come through the house,
Mhm.
that trumps somebody saying, I'm not required by law to sign it.
Well,
I mean, I've
They
had
get-
open houses where I'm the listing agent. They said, we want to know who's walking through our house. We want them to
Right.
sign it. Now they could give fake information for all we know, whatever. But
the seller realizes that they can put crap information down, right?
yes, because I've always told them that, but I guess it's the principle of the thing.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Or I guess my question is, what if somebody pushes back and say, I'm not signing anything and I still can come through?
Thank you so much.
Can I get, well, if you're instructed by it all depends on the instruction of your seller, which I would get in writing. And if your seller says, I don't want anybody in here who doesn't sign in. So you can say, I've been instructed by my seller not to show the property to anybody who doesn't sign in. So I'm sorry, I can't. And you have it in writing.
Yes.
You can refuse to let them in because you're being instructed. Now, if I was that person, I'd put a bogus name and number down.
Mickey
mean,
Mouse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, there's really nothing you can do. But you can't say, "Oh, you're lying." You know, it's
There ought
not
to
your
be a
name.
law
That's not your
against it.
number. You know, so I would, you know, I would just, you know, if you have, if it's an instruction by your client and you have it in writing, that's the important part. Then I would say that you don't have to let them in. So,
Thank you.
okay. So then let's see. There was I just looked at this. What is this called? Hold on. BF. Okay, this is part of the. I showed this to you guys the last time. The buyer financial. This goes to the thing. Is your buyer able to pay you? This is actually a required form as with your buyer broker agreement. It's supposed to be delivered within, I think it's 5 days, to go over how financially are you financially viable to buy this house? Are you financially you know, which also includes to pay my commission. So you know, so this is also a new form that goes with the buyer broker agreement. Let me see if there's
Should we be adding the broker compensation advisory as well?
absolutely. That's you should be using that now.
Okay.
It definitely is in the new checklist that as I said, we've been back and forth with compliant with all the offices compliance thing. Is this the one that
Rich, our buyers who've already signed a buyer broker and are already pre-approved for a loan, we don't have to go back and make them fill that out.
no, because it's not a part of that agreement.
Our old buyer brokers, mine last like 6 months or longer. Do they revert to 3 months once the new law?
Yes. Yes. And that's also, and it's, I think I've explained this before, it's reverting to 3 months because that's what the new law in January of 2025 is going to be. They had to make concessions with the legislatures, and that was one of them, that it would be limited to 3 months, which you can extend, but initially it can't be more than 3 months.
But that's only on new contracts, not the ones.
New one, no, not ones that exist presently. So buyer material issues for specific, you know, it's like, I want to rent this out as an ADU. You know, well, if he buys it and then finds out that he can't, and then he or she never told you, then, you know, it's, which has happened, believe me. You know, these are all just for, you know, they just think of forms and, you know, to waste paper.
We're going paperless.
Well, I mean, yeah, it should be by now, you would think. Did they change it? Wait, let me see. Wait, hold on. This all they changed this. I think they changed this to be grid, and that's what all the red is about. But I do want to point out that it's, where is it here? The form that I just showed you. Sorry. Oh, time to deliver buyer personal/financial information within 5 days of the execution of this, or or it could be attached. So that's the BFPI.
So
the
we
one
could
that I just-
fire them if they don't have that done in 5 days?
Yes, you could. You
Oh,
could.
okay. Well, I
You
didn't need
always
that.
could.
I didn't need that piece of
Remember
paper
that
to do that.
this defaults to non-exclusive, which it's a non-exclusive agreement. You can make it exclusive. If the buyer agrees, can be exclusive.
Wow.
And if it's non-exclusive, a buyer can have many different non-exclusive agreements with many different brokers.
Right.
And be prepared for that. So it's imperative that now that you get the buyer, keep track of what you're showing these buyers, and or which ones you're sending them to see, and get the form signed that these are broker involved properties.
Too much work.
Well, you want to get. It's all about being paid, Dave, and if you want to get paid, then
That's not a guarantee you're going to get paid.
well, it's not.
It's just a piece of paper that somebody's going to, like all the other papers they've given us.
It is. It isn't, but
They
it's required.
dehumanize the business.
It is required now, so that's nothing.
Yeah,
But if
well-
you're exclusive, you don't need all those property addresses, right?
No, because if you're exclusive, you need to point out to the buyer who signs an exclusive agreement that if during the period of this agreement that we're signing, if you buy something with another broker, you still owe me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So
Go collect.
yeah, I've collected on a buyer broker agreement.
Yeah.
Rich,
I have.
since there is like two boxes to check, exclusive or non-exclusive for the buyer broker agreement, why would any buyer sign one that's exclusive?
Well,
I have to ask somebody tomorrow, and I've known them 37 years. I've known them forever, but I'm still nervous about it. I get nervous when I have to ask people, and I've been doing this 24 years.
well, I mean, it's like, hey, it's sign an exclusive agreement with me for a month and see how it goes. If you're nervous about it, you could do that.
Hey, Rich, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna chime in for that. I've always used that form and I've always made it exclusive because it's about the conversation you're having.
Right.
So, I wouldn't take a client, and I've used that form for 5 years. Obviously, this is gonna be a revamp form, but it
Right.
always gave a choice. You're either exclusive with me, like always have a conversation saying, hey, this is my commitment to you that I'm doing this. You're committing to me solely. And that's the conversation. And going forward, I'm not gonna change it, other than if they won't sign that, they're not gonna be my client. Because I wouldn't work for somebody that isn't gonna sign that. So it's just having the conversations about it.
Yeah,
I think there's-
Rich, this is not really that easy. I mean, some buyers get very insulted. I mean, as you said, you should be exclusive with me. And the answer would be that, look, we have worked together all these years. Don't you trust me? Why you want me to go through all this paperwork? Let's go
Well,
put our
the
energy and
paperwork
find out the property.
is going to be mandatory. So that's what buyers need to understand. Number one.
What do you
No,
mean?
it doesn't need to be exclusive, but starting in August, every buyer that you work with, you need to get a buyer broker agreement signed.
Rich, I
Yes.
got to ask you, when you say it's mandatory, who's mandatory? Who's making it mandatory?
NAR. You're a member of NAR.
And so if you're a member of NAR or you're a
Right.
realtor, you
Right.
have to do this document
Right.
with and
Exactly.
irregardless of what your relationship is with the
Right.
people.
Right. And
Okay.
starting
Well, I'm going to
in
do that with my wife.
and and you would required to, and starting in January of 2025, the state of California makes it mandatory.
Wow. Okay.
And that's irregardless whether you're a member of CAR, NAR,
Right.
SAR, or any, that's just the
Right.
state. Want to do
And that
business
was,
here?
and that's why
Yeah.
they made the concession of making it no longer than
law.
3 months, because they wanted it to apply to everybody who has a real estate license. Because there are real estate licensees who are not a member of NAR,
Right.
and who are not realtors, and they wouldn't have to do this.
Half the
So in
attorney,
order for CAR to make those concessions, they limited the amount of time so that every single licensee has to get a buyer broker agreement.
half the lawyers in the state of California that can do this contract. And they don't have licenses with or members of NAR or MLS, but they know a realtor that they can get all the information from. Yeah, that's good.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm gonna
look,
go, I'm going
it's
hourly.
it's a new world. This industry has always been known to be well adaptive, and we'll see how well people adapt. I mean, that's, this is, unfortunately, this is the way we have to do business now.
Yeah.
We have no other choice, because of everything that's been going on. There was something in here that I wanted to show you. I think you'll see that on the last page. This is the last page, confirmation of compensation. So this would be the only thing that would have to be presented to either the seller or to escrow, to confirm that you have a buyer broker agreement. I thought there was something in here, sorry, about escrow. I can't find it right now, but I'll do a class on just the buyer broker agreement at some time. Stop share. Okay. I think that's all the ones that I needed to go over. Once again, I will tell you that my share, I don't think I'm sharing anymore. Anyway. This is the broker compensation advisory, which, as I said, you should be using starting now. It's already out. It's been out for a few months. And it explains how we're compensated. You should be using it for buyers, for sellers, to explain exactly how we get paid. And talks about historically that the MLS was used, all of that. Let me see. Just double checking if I went over everything. Yep, that's it. Okay. Anybody? I know that's it's a lot. But anybody have any questions that I didn't? Christine, you went to the town hall today, Christine? Hello?
Yep,
Yeah.
I did.
How was
I
it?
did. Good. I mean, they're not taking live questions this time, so I have a feeling a lot of it's going to be kind of repeat because they're offering it like 6 or 7 times.
Right.
It was good. They did go over a lot of the forms that you're talking about. And it was good. I mean, every agent should watch it. I mean, for sure, 100%. And then if you watch it, I feel like I have a better understanding of what you're saying on both sides. Like listening to you, I understand a little bit more what they're saying. Listening to them, I understand what you're saying.
Right.
And
I encourage everybody to
Yeah.
try to attend one of the town hall. I will say, I mean, I know that there's some critics of NAR and CAR. I do think that CAR does a good job about training. They have the best interests of their members at heart. I know that. I work with them a lot. So they saw the writing on the wall. Instead of waiting for the DOJ to get back to them, they just took the initiative and said, look, this is what's going to happen, and so let's just move forward and move on and just change the way we're doing business, and we're all going to have growing pains, and but we'll all get through it, right? It's just learning a new muscle group, and I think it'll become second nature. It's going to take a good 3 to 6 months. I know that, for all of us to get the kinks out and work it through, but
And
we'll
the
do
point
it.
is we have to. There's like,
Right,
what's the
exactly.
alternative? It's like,
Right.
Who's gonna, the seasoned agents, almost are at a disadvantage because the new agents, this is gonna be the way they learn.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of the listening to it or looking at the forms that they were showing today, and you, Rich, it answers a lot of the questions that people are asking. Like if you look at it, you'll say, oh, that makes sense now that you're seeing it, so anyway, but thank you so much, Rich. I know you get a lot
Alright.
of heat, and I really appreciate it, that everything that you, instruct us, and thank you so much.
All right. Well,
Hey,
thank you
Rich.
everybody for.
I don't
Rich,
think he
before
gets
you go,
enough heat.
quickly,
I think you should get
where
more
can
heat,
we-
Rich.
I should get what,
You should
Steve?
get more heat. I don't think you
I
get.
should. Oh yes. Don't worry, Steve. I get plenty.
Rich, where can we
Yes.
find this recording?
Check with Alejandro. As soon as I get the recordings, I send it out to each of the offices. I don't know where each office stores it, so check with Alejandro. Where I won't get it probably until tonight or tomorrow because it's recorded on the cloud, and then I send it out fairly quickly. So the
And Alan,
offices
if you're-
should have it by tomorrow.
That's Rich's, and if Alan, if you're asking about the town hall one,
Oh,
everybody got an email from Carr saying, here's all the town halls there, and it's
Right.
on MLS. There's 7 of them, all this week, all next week, multiple times and places.
right. The CAR, I don't think that they're recording and giving out the recording just yet. I think that they're just doing all these town
Right.
halls. They allow you to ask questions in the Q&A.
No,
chat?
they're not
No?
doing that.
They're not doing
saying
that?
they-
Okay.
They said they had too many, and for the sake of time, but they
Right.
would be addressing emails, and they did give an email address, and they did answer a couple emails. So, and then they said, so if you send an email now, we don't address it today, we might address it on a different town hall, or you
Ugh.
might get it in a class. So
Right.
it's, don't expect to ask a question and get an answer, I would say.
All right.
But okay, thank you so
Okay,
much.
but
Rich.
try to attend. Look for the CAR email that went out, and try to attend one of those town halls. All right. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Rich. Thank you
joining
so much.
me.
Thank
And
you, Rich.
till the next